AV in your ears, that's ambush being giving you this audio visual down the most interesting street in the world. With my boy Steve, Fascination Street, you already know. Let's get it when you whip in the Fascination Street. What do you...
Hello, my name is Dickie Barrett. I'm in the Mighty Mighty Bosstones, and I'm in a band called The Defiant. And you're listening to Fascination Street with my good friend, Steve.
Yeah! AV in your ears, that's ambush being giving you this audio visual down the most interesting street in the world. With my boy Steve, Fascination Street, you already know. Let's get it when you whip in the Fascination Street. What do you...
Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Frank Meyer. Frank Meyer has been a fixture on the West Coast punk and indie rock scene for decades. Most notably as the frontman for the Streetwalkin Cheetahs, but he has also played with everybody you've ever heard of in the punk landscape. He also currently plays sometimes with Fear and a bunch of other folks. In this episode, we talk about his growing up. Him and his brother Brecken Meyer, who you may know as an actor, both grew up in sort of the Los Angeles area around a bunch of creative people and a bunch of creative industries. So we talk about how those things affected each of their trajectories. He shares some fun, cool stories about growing up with the Zappas and some fun concerts he got to go to as a kid, including the actual Blues Brothers when he was just a wee lad. We also talk about some of the books he has written, including On the Road with the Ramones, plus a book about Phil Spector, and even some books about being a single father. As with most creatives, he doesn't limit himself to just music and books. He also is a filmmaker. We touch on a couple of his films, but mostly we touch on the hip-hop films he has made. He made 2 documentaries. One is about his friend Hell Razah and sort of the tribulations that man went through. It is the story of Hell Razah's life as told by Hell Razah with a little help from Frank Meyer. We also talk about the other hip-hop based film he made, and both of those films are available on Amazon. Finally, we talk about music. All of the music things, some of the acts he's worked with, some of the acts he continues to work with, and his debut solo album. It is called Living Between the Lines. It is on the Kitten Robot label. Frank lets me play my favorite song off the album. It is called Blue Radio, and I think you're going to dig it. This episode is a lot of fun. It's a little bit longer than some of the other ones, but I think you'll understand why. There's a lot of good stuff in here. Great stories, great nuggets, great music, and this is my conversation with multi-hyphenate creative Frank Meyer.
Prepare to be fascinated. Prepare to be fascinated. Prepare to be fascinated.
Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, Frank Meyer. What's up, dude?
Hey, man. How are you?
I cannot complain. First of all, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your cross-country crime spree with Eddie Spaghetti to do this with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We were on our way down to Mexico having robbed a bank earlier, but we stopped off at the local cafe, and I'm going to make this Zoom call with you, and then we're going to head down to Escape to Paradise.
Oh, fantastic. I'm not far from the Texas-Mexico border, so swing by and say hello to a fella.
Excellent. I've spent a lot of time in Juarez, so I know exactly where the drugs are kept.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Frank Meyer. You know him from all of the things, and we're going to get to some of those things shortly. But first, Frank, what I like to do is I like to talk about where were you born and raised, because it helps us understand how you got from where you were to where you are. So where'd you grow up, man?
I was born in the Bay Area, so Marin County is actually where I was born. I was raised for the most part in Los Angeles, but my folks lived in Minneapolis for a little while. So I spent some early years in Minneapolis, but I barely remember that. Most of my memories are Los Angeles, or when my folks got divorced, half my family was up north, so I spent a lot of time in like the Bay Area.
Got you.
I'm a Cali kid for the most part.
Well, since you brought it up, growing up in Laurel Canyon with around folks like the Zappa family, how much credit do you give that environment for you and your brother Brecken choosing creative paths?
A tremendous amount of credit. I think we were really lucky. We grew up around so many artists and the children of artists and just around people that had a value in being a creative mind. In general, it was great because, you know, he went on to an acting career and I went on to a music career. And growing up, we were surrounded by a lot of people who were involved in the arts. So in general, it was very kind of accommodating and inspiring. But specifically, we grew up around the Zappa kids and the Zappa household. So like I recorded my first demos at the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen, which was Frank's studio. I was in the studio when he was recording. I recorded with Dweezil at the studio. Dweezil recorded me at the studio. We had bands that we were doing back then, and we were making, you know, little home movies and all sorts of stuff like that. And I went to a lot of concerts and a lot of events with them when I was young and met even more musicians and actors and, you know, showbiz people. So the idea of getting into music or entertainment, period, didn't seem so far-fetched to us, because we were surrounded by it. So if you lived in, you know, Kansas City, or you lived out in a farm somewhere, all these things like making movies and making music or just whatever might seem kind of impossible, you know, like, well, how would one even do that here in this town where none of that exists? But we lived in Los Angeles and we were surrounded by artists for the most part. So it seemed very plausible for myself or my brother to get into the creative things that were inspiring us when we were young, which in his case was acting and for me was music.
That worked out pretty well for both of you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've mentioned his brother Brecken a couple of times. It's famed and acclaimed actor Brecken Meyer, who everybody knows from all of the things. Probably his longest running TV thing was Franklin and Bash, I think.
Yeah, although he's on Robot Chicken, which I think has been around longer.
Yeah, that's been around since before me.
And he was on King of the Hill, which was around for 10-ish years, something like that. So, but of course, those were animated. So,
and little known fact, Miramax wanted to replace Jason Mewes of Jay and Silent Bob with Brecken Meyer.
I could see it. Brecken was the classic go-to guy for your stoner, skater, slacker character in a 90s movie.
Sure.
Clueless and his role as Travis Birkenstock was probably kind of his career defining moment at that time. And I think that set a lot of things into motion for him in terms of maybe not getting typecast, but getting sort of thrown a lot of roles as those iconic kind of roles in like 90s rom-coms and comedies. And, you know, he's in a lot of good stuff. A little known fact is Brecken is also the first drummer in the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. He plays on all the early demos, some of which, because we've been around so damn long, have come out now on Rarities records and demos and collections and stuff. But he was the first drummer in the Cheetahs, and he also played drums with Tom Morello, and he played drums with Wayne Kramer. In fact, both of us were in Wayne Kramer's band at different times. So Brecken's got a pretty good, solid little career in music as well as his very successful acting career. Both kind of just artistic kids. I mean, I'm a musician, but my day job is, well, these days my day job actually is playing music. But for a long time, I was doubling between being a musician and a filmmaker and a writer. I guess that would be tripling. So I'm a film director, and I've directed a bunch of films that have come out, documentaries mainly, and a lot of music videos. And I worked at TV networks for years and stuff. And then I also have written 8 books, and they're all published and stuff. So, you know, I think both Brecken and I are just creative people, and we just found one lane that was our strongest lane, but we do a lot of other stuff.
That makes sense. We're going to bounce all over the place, but since you brought it up, why did you write a book about Phil Spector?
Well, mainly because I had written a book about the Ramones, and he has a kind of important role in their history. So the first book I wrote was called On the Road with the Ramones, and I wrote it with Monty Melnick, who was the tour manager of the Ramones for their entire career, which is kind of unusual. Most bands have a different tour manager every couple tours or whatever.
But didn't he miss like 2 shows or something?
I think he technically missed 2 shows. Yes, he did. So damn you, Monty. But he saw everything, and so he had a publishing deal and was looking for a writer. and they had kind of paraded around all these writers to him, and he didn't really relate to any of them. We had a mutual friend, and I got brought in, and I was on tour with the Streetwalkin Cheetahs in Germany at the time when I first talked to Monty. So I think he liked the fact that I was kind of living the life that our book was going to be about, being a touring musician, and he liked my writing. So I did that book, and it's kind of considered, I mean, there's a few really good Ramones books, but it's definitely considered one of the top Ramones books and sort of a classic. A lot of people, it's in like 8 different languages, and I think it's on its 5th pressing. It did really well. And because Phil Spector had produced their album End of the Century, we did it, and that was also around the time of the movie Rock and Roll High School, and was also around the time when Johnny Ramone started having an affair with Joey Ramone's girlfriend at the time and became Johnny's wife, Linda. 1980 basically is a very pivotal year for the Ramones in many ways, and Phil Spector is very connected to the stuff that happened with them in 1980. So because of that, I guess, they always say if you want to become an expert in something, you write a book. So after that book came out, I was considered kind of a Ramones expert, and Rhino wanted to do a Phil Spector book. I think they were releasing maybe like a box set or something around that time. And they came to me and asked if I would be interested in writing kind of an offshoot of my book that would basically be just about his work on End of the Century and that sort of period in his life. And since I had access to everyone, I said, sure.
Wow. That's amazing.
A lot of ways I've gotten book gigs have been kind of just right guy at the right time, or least annoying person in the room is sort of the way I get a lot of gigs, meaning like, they'll say, hey, you've got an interesting story, but you're not necessarily a writer. So we need to team you up with someone, find you like a co-writer, a co-author or whatever. And not always, but if I were to generalize, writers tend to be very internalized people. So sometimes writers, while super talented, are not the best hang. A lot of times in the books that I've written where it's like someone kind of talking about their whole life story, part of the gig is like, can I hang out with this dude? Like, can I just sit down with someone and endlessly talk about my life and get asked questions and not want to like murder this person at some point? And I think by the time they meet me, they're like, all right, this guy seems all right. He kind of knows what he's doing and he's not too annoying. So not too annoying is really how I get a lot of my gigs. I mean, annoying, just not too annoying.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's a certain level of annoyance. If you're going to deal with artists and creatives, there's a certain level of annoyance you just have to accept. But you just don't want to pass a certain threshold because then they become unbearable, Like I worked on Dave Mustane's first book, Metal Memoirs. It changed publishing companies like 3 times. So I worked on a version of it, but I worked on it. And then I worked with Niels Lozauer on his first Van Halen book, A Visual History, 1978 through 84. And then I worked with sports photographer Walter Yost Jr. on a book on football. That would probably be my most unlikely gig you'd associate me with. And then I also did 2 books on parenting, like books for young dads, new dads. One's called From Dude to Dad, and one's called Diaper Dude, because I also am a single father to a now 21-year-old daughter. So that's another field of expertise, if you will. I think there's a couple others in there somewhere, but there you go. That's a good sampling.
Why did you feel the need to write a parenting book from the position of a single father?
I don't know that I would say I felt a need. All these books kind of came from just, like I said, kind of being in the right place at the right time. The Ramones book, I told you I met Monty and he was already looking to do it. Then the publishing company liked me, so they recommended me for the Mustane book. And another publishing company liked what I did with the Ramones books or the Phil Spector book. And they kind of all just sort of would come, like one would do well and I'd get recommended or asked to do something else. And then I was kind of done with it. I'd done like 5, 6, rock bio type books and decided that I didn't necessarily need to do anymore. I was like, man, I've kind of done this. Then I got approached by a mutual friend who introduced me to a guy named Chris Pagula, and Chris ran a company called Diaper Dude that was doing sort of like men's Baby Bjorns, and all the stuff for parents was all at this time directed towards women. And there wasn't really anything for like men to like, wear like a diaper bag or something and not look like, you're with all this flowery stuff. And so he started doing kind of stuff like, hey, here's just some straight black stuff and some gray stuff and some stuff that's like denim and leather and just diaper bags and baby Bjorns and carryalls and all that stuff so that, guys could have their sort of identity in there too. And the company was doing well, and he was doing a lot of talk shows and stuff because he was a young, hip dad, and people were interested in his kind of take on things. And so, like I said, they always say, if you want to be an expert in something, you got to write a book. So his people told him, you got to write a book. He gets introduced to a bunch of writers that he doesn't like, and then someone throws my name in the hat, just like with every other book. And I go in and we have a beer, and we walked in. We were both kind of wearing like the same jeans and same T-shirt, and kind of we're about the same age, and instantly got along. We ordered the same drink, and we're like, oh, okay, this guy seems cool. And we just had a great hang, and that's how I got it.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hey, this is Landon from the podcast Landon Talks with Kate. Y'all, we wrote a book, Bless Your Heart, A Field Guide to All Things Southern. Comes out April 1st of 2025, and I know that's April Fool's Day, and I do stand-up comedy, but this is not a joke. I literally wrote a book. It's a field guide to life in the South. It's a field guide to how things go down here. It is a hilarious adventure. It's one of those kind of books that you can pick up at any point and read any part of it. You don't have to read it straight through because it is just a fun jaunt, a fun little saunter down an encyclopedia of Southern life. And I will tell y'all, it really got interesting because I am Southern, obviously. So the things I say, I understand. My editors were not. So we've got footnotes, we've got cross references. This thing is turned educational because we had to explain it for everybody. So if you're from the South, you're going to love it because it's hilarious, the things that we talk about and do and the way that we exist. If you're not from the South, you're going to love it because it's a literal guide into life down here and all the silly things that we do and say and all the nostalgia as well. You can pre-order your copy now wherever books are sold. And if you want to hear more from me, check out my podcast, Landon Talks with Kate, wherever podcasts are found.
Let's get back into it.
Back to being a good hang. That's the secret to everybody's success.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's been a bit of a hallmark. I mean, now that you sort of put it that way, because a lot of the gigs that I've gotten outside of my own bands, so I like my bands. When I say my bands, I mean bands where I write the songs and kind of instigated the creation of the band would be like Streetwalkin Cheetahs or Trading Aces. That's my band based in Europe. And those are bands that I essentially started. But along the way, I've gotten picked by other artists to work with them, or I've gotten jobs playing like guitar, singing, and in projects where I didn't necessarily instigate it. A lot of times those are bigger projects where I'm kind of taking on more of a sideman role. I think a lot of the reason why I get a lot of those gigs, obviously, I can play guitar and I can sing. And if I'm up for a gig, like I'm playing in the punk band Fear now, and I play in Leaving from Fear's country band Range War, and I play with Handsome Dick Manitoba of the Dictators. And so all these bands, like I learned their body of work on guitar, might be doing some backing vocals or whatnot, and then, go on the road and stuff. And it's like, I know there's a lot of other guitar players that can play this material. I mean, I think I'm very good at it, and it's all in my wheelhouse, so I'm a very good candidate for it. But it's guitar, in Hollywood, there's 10 other guys that can do what you can do on guitar. What I am is experienced and an easy hang, and I don't get flustered easily, and I'm not drama, and I'm, can be funny unless I sense that I should shut up. So I'm an easy guy to have in your band. You know what I mean? I'm not going to ruffle feathers. I'm not stepping on toes. I'm not getting wasted and saying a bunch of stupid shit. When I worked with James Williamson, he had just come off of doing, about a decade of Stooges reunion shows, and him and Iggy decided they were kind of done with that, but he had gotten the bug to continue making music, but he needed to find someone else to make it with because Iggy was going back to his solo career. And I had met James. Cheetah Chrome recommended me to sing a guest spot for him at a concert he did. And there were a lot of vocalists doing guest spots at that concert. And I was probably the least famous person. It was like Jello Biafra, and Ron Young, and Jesse Matlin, all these like much more Allison Mose Wright, all these like famous hip people, and me. I do my thing. Like, I'm not saying whether I'm the best vocalist, the worst vocalist. I know what I'm doing. I do my act. I brought what I bring to James's material for the couple spots that he gave me. But a year later, I get a call from him, and he's like, hey, the Stooges are are going to be breaking up soon, and I'm looking to find a new guy to write songs with. And I really liked your voice, and I really liked you and just kind of hanging out with you. You seem, it's implication. You seem like an easy hang. And so, do you want to maybe write some songs, see where it goes? And we wrote a couple songs, became a couple more, became an album. James Williamson and the Pink Hearts album came out a few years back. It's one of the things I'm most proud of in my career. And he certainly pushed me to be a better, a great vocalist and to bring the most out of me. But again, I think a lot of it was just that when he got to know me that first time around, I just probably seemed like the easiest guy in the room to get along with. Hopefully, maybe, I don't know. Maybe he would tell you otherwise.
Yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the key to most things, is being a good hang, whether it's an actor that people want to work with or a director that people want to work with or just a musician that people want to work with. Just be a good fucking hang, guys. Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember, we're going to bounce all over the place. You mentioned the Streetwalkin Cheetahs, which is your band. You have a song called Right to Rock.
Yep.
Did you steal the name of that song from Keel?
Oh, I sure did. Absolutely, I did. I'm a Keel fan. I had the Lay Down the Law EP as a kid and the Right to Rock and the Final Frontier. And I absolutely 100% lifted that title for our song. There's nothing about the song that sounds like that song. And obviously in the world of songwriting, there's a million songs called Satisfaction. There's people take titles all the time. As long as you're not stealing someone's song, the title is kind of always up for grabs. Just like with movies and all that stuff. There's always multiple titles on stuff. It wasn't an accident. I mean, we wrote the song and the song was going, rock and roll is this song about rock that rocked and says rock in it. So when we were trying to come up with a title, I just said, man, it should be something like Keel's Right to Rock. And we kind of looked at each other and we're like, or we just call it Right to Rock. I think you're the second person ever to ask me that question. So I think we were correct when we assumed that 98% of the Streetwalkin Cheetahs audience, who generally listen to punk rock and garage rock and stuff, were going to be familiar with Keel. And that the couple that were probably pretty cool, and we'd have a good laugh over it.
Good hang.
So,
that's awesome.
A good hang, yeah. There's a few times, like on the last record, One More Drink, there's just the title track, One More Drink, is overtly influenced by Dramarama. Like I'm a big Dramarama fan, and I kind of was like, oh, I'm going to write like a Dramarama kind of song, but about drinking instead of a last cigarette, and wrote it and really liked the song. But I thought, man, I don't want people to come out and be like, oh, they ripped off Dramarama. So I'm going to avoid that conversation by calling up John Easdale, who is a friend of mine, and saying, John, will you sing this song as a duet with me? And that way it's very clearly an homage to Dramarama instead of a knockoff. And he listened and he goes, yeah, I love it. Great song. Let's do it. So he came in and sang it. And that's how you make an homage.
I love it. Walking that tightrope. Back to the Zappas real quick. Tell me about the concrete wall at the Zappa house, and do you have any toys sticking out of it?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have any toys. So what you're talking about is if you went out through the back door of the kitchen, which was on the top floor, but underneath that was the recording studio. And then underneath that was the vault. If you walked out through the back, you'd kind of go through this backyard area and then up these stairs, and there was a pool, and then there was a back house. And a lot of times when I would stay the night, I would end up staying in the back house because it was a fully available, room. And in between the pool and the back house was this big concrete wall. I remember the first time I saw it when I went over to their house. I was in like 7th grade, I think. Like many things at the Zappa's house, I was blown away by it because they had this giant concrete wall and all the kids' toys and like little jewels and Legos and stuff were all stuck in the wall, and it had all been dried. The concrete had died. So this wall was filled with like kids' toys sticking out of it. It's very creative, very artistic, very ridiculous, and very funny and very Zappa. I loved that. But I think by the time I saw the wall, it was already done. And I don't recall them ever like redoing it besides when it eventually got knocked down, I assume. So no, I don't think there's any toys of mine in the wall, but I did see the wall and I was always very impressed by it.
Gotcha. Who else did you go to school with at the country school? And was the country school that school that was sort of like less focused on traditional education and more like everybody said Indian style and let's just chat or was it a real school?
No, it was a real school. The country school, I'm not even really sure why they called it the country school, because it was in Studio City or North Hollywood. So, I mean, there was nothing country about the area, nor did they have any kind of country theme in the school, nor was it, kind of that Montessori school thing where, everyone's right and everyone gets a prize. To my recollection, it was just a regular grade school. Maybe a little bit on the liberally hippie side, but I think that probably is more just because it was Los Angeles in the 80s, you know what I mean? Like that was the temperature of the city at that time, I think. Really, because of its location, I think, being where it was, that school and the school I went to afterwards for a little while called Oakwood both got a lot of people whose parents were in showbiz, or sometimes kids that were in showbiz, like kids that were child actors. If they weren't on set with a tutor, they'd be at a school in Los Angeles. And if you were in show business, chances are you lived in Hollywood or the Valley. And chances are your kids went to Oakwood or the country school, grade school. And then Oakwood was a junior high and high school. They didn't have like different teaching philosophies or anything. It was just normal school. So when we went to country school, that's where I met the Zappas. I met them in second grade. We all went to camp together too. So I met Moon and Amit somewhere around second grade, and then met Diva and Dweezil a few years later. Drew Barrymore, she went to a country school. Stephen Dorff went there. There was a kid named Oliver Robbins who was in the movie Poltergeist. He's the one that gets attacked by the clown in Poltergeist, and he's also in Airplane 2. He was a child actor that went there, and at that time he was in Poltergeist, so he was hot property. There was other kids that were actors, but no one really that jumped out. I guess in retrospect, Drew would probably be the big one in terms of, she had done E.T. at the time and continued to be doing a lot of high profile stuff. And, we've known Drew our whole life. She's a total sweetheart. And that was my brother's first girlfriend. They were in grade school.
Sure.
So, girlfriend's a loose term there, but yeah. And she was a hot, meaning she was a popular young actress at the time who was in a blockbuster movie and following it up with Firestarter and Cat's Eye and all these other movies. So she was getting a lot of work. She came from a show business family, and Brecken, I think, went on the set with her to a few things and kind of was just like, whoa, you mean they just give you candy and you can play video games all day? And they barely use you? You get to 3 hours between takes? This is great. So he essentially asked if she could introduce him to someone and help him get down that path. And she had at the time the biggest agency for child actors in the world, the Harry Gold Agency. And so he went and auditioned there and did well and immediately started getting work and immediately started becoming a professional actor in like grade school.
Oh, wow. Drew Barrymore's movie E.T., the kid Elliot, Henry Thomas, he's from here, San Antonio, where I'm from, and my sister dated him like in middle school or went out on a date with him or some shit like that.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Small world. Tell me about being front row center at the Blues Brothers concert at Universal Amphitheater, and what did Dan Aykroyd say to you?
My parents loved music, and by parents, because I had some step parents, a big family, but my mom, after she and Brecken's dad got divorced, because we have different dads, same mom, she married an entertainment attorney, and one of his many clients, because he did everyone from like Eazy-E to Yoko Ono.
That's a huge...
It's a huge spectrum, right? He did Green Day, Tom Petty, Ray Parker Jr., all sorts of stuff. He was on the Ghostbusters versus I Want to Do Drug case.
Oh, snap.
Yeah, a bunch of famous cases. And the one where Tom Petty sued his own label for raising the price of his record $1, he was involved in that one. He was Irving Azoff's attorney when Irving Azoff ran Universal, and part of running Universal meant he ran the Universal Amphitheater, which became the Gibson Amphitheater, which became the Harry Potter ride at Universal Studios. So our parents took us to a lot of concerts at the Universal Amphitheater, and the first concert I ever saw that I remember was Jimmy Buffett at the Universal Amphitheater. I remember seeing Tom Petty at the Forum early on, but my parents took us to see the Blues Brothers, and this was right when the movie came out, and the band was Booker T and the MGs, featuring Matt Guitar Murphy. It was the cast of the movie, Paul Schaefer on keyboards. When they would walk out, they'd walk out to dun 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 dun, just like bah, 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 bah. And Elwood had a briefcase, they had an album called Briefcase Full of Blues, and it was handcuffed to his arm. So he walks out and he's got the briefcase and the handcuffs, and then as the music's happening, he kind of displays it to Jake, and Jake pulls out a big key ring, undoes the case, and they pull it out and pulls his harmonicas out of the case, and then boom, the band switches on a dime and they start the first song. During this moment, because we were probably the only children in this otherwise concert, totally inappropriate for children, because there was a lot of cursing and drug references, because John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd in the 70s, 80, it was probably 79, 80, I'm not sure exactly. But we were front row center, so there must have been like a light practically beaming on us. And so they saw us, and just as they were doing the moment with the handcuffs, Elwood, Dan Aykroyd, says into his mic, "Hey, Jake," and he points to us and goes, "Want to beat up a couple of kids?" We thought that was very cool. We also we saw Eddie Murphy on the Delirious tour and the Raw tour. And I don't remember which one this was. Again, super inappropriate for children of our age to be at this concert, but it's Eddie Murphy, comic genius. It was the first comedy show I ever saw was Eddie Murphy on the Delirious tour. And again, I don't remember us having front row center, but I know we had great seats. I remember it being great, always was.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors. Let's get back into it.
We had backstage passes. And these are all, again, I think seeing these things, having this access, these were the kind of things that as little kids made the idea of like, I'm going to be a musician, or in my brother's case, I'm going to be an actor, kind of seem possible. Because you'd go backstage or something, and we didn't really know or care about this idea of like who's famous or money or anything like that. It was more just like, that guy's on TV, Dad. You know what I mean? Like, hey, there's Eddie Murphy. He plays Gumby on Saturday Night Live, So we were just kind of like, whoa, it's like, hey, that guy from TV was just on stage and is now standing there 10 feet from me. He's a real person. And now he's not being, Eddie Murphy, the big comedian. He's just talking to, I think that's his mom. You know what I mean? So those kind of moments of seeing all these like celebrities as like real people, I think made this idea of becoming an artist like a much more tangible thing. So we go after the Eddie Murphy concert, Busboys opened.
The Busboys are badass.
My brother, the boys are back in town.
I loved them in, 48 Hours?
Yeah, they're the band in 48 Hours. So they were like Eddie's opening band for those tours. So we go, my brother needed to pee, and he's a little kid. I'm probably like 8. My brother's probably like 4 or 5 or something. But my stepdad basically goes, well, we've got the passes. We'll go backstage. It'll be easier than you waiting in line. We'll take him to pee. We were not going to hang out. My parents were not like that. They didn't really want to go and hang out backstage, but we had the passes, and that seemed like the way to pee. So we all go back there, and my mom says, I'll find a bathroom. And we're standing around. My dad's having a drink at the bar or whatever. And I look over, and the backstage area where Eddie Murphy's backstage was had this like sliding glass door. And I look through the door, and Eddie Murphy in his purple outfit from the stage is holding my brother in front of like all of his friends going, "Hey man, where'd this kid come from? Where'd this little white kid come from?" My dad's like, "Hey, where's your mother?" And I'm like, "I think they're over there with Eddie Murphy." And sure enough, they were there with Eddie Murphy because my mom didn't know. And she just asked someone for the first bathroom, and they pointed to Eddie Murphy's dressing room, and she took him to fucking Eddie Murphy's dressing room bathroom so my little brother could pee. And then Eddie Murphy was so delighted by this, like, why on earth is there a little kid at the show, that he just grabbed my brother and started kind of horsing around with him. So, we definitely lived like a charmed life in that respect. I mean, I wouldn't say we necessarily lived a charmed life in a lot of other ways, but in terms of like the era that we grew up in and some of the special, talented, incredible people that we met and sort of the access to things that we had at a young age made our dreams of wanting to be performers, because that's really what we both are, and artists, because that's really what we both are. They didn't seem that far-fetched. So we just kind of went at it at a really young age. I was playing guitar by 12, formed a band by 13, was playing the clubs by 14. My brother was already a professional actor by 6. And basically, we both still do those same things that we started when we were little kids, when we got inspired.
I love that. That's the dream,
Yeah, I think it is, man.
To find something early and to stick with it and be great at it.
I mean, I had a point in my life a few years ago where by the time I joined Fear and Manitoba, Range War, doing the Cheetahs, doing Trading Aces, got a record deal for my solo record. And then when I'm not doing that, directing. These days, I'm not as much writing, but a lot of directing music videos, and I do a lot of marketing type stuff that you wouldn't care about. Like, this is my day job now. Like, I don't have a boss anymore. Like, about 3 years ago, when I was still doing all these things, but I also had kind of like a corporate job that kind of was paid the bills. And I just kind of got to a point where I was like, how do I cut that part out of my life? Because I don't really want to be told that even if you don't have work today, you have to go into an office. And I don't want to answer to some marketing or sales guy or someone that suddenly goes, oh, you can't do this anymore. We're getting rid of this person. We're firing this team. We're letting you guys go, or all this. I kind of just found that by being in show business, in that day job kind of corporate version of it, that I was always beholden to things that were not in my power to do anything about, that I couldn't control. And I don't mean that from a control freak point of view. I mean it from like, I work really hard at what I do, and just to have someone push the numbers one day at a company I work at that I've been told I've got, a good career in and everything's going well. And then suddenly they go, you know what, let's pull the plug on this thing. Boom, get rid of those 30 people. And like, we're all without a job like that. You know what I mean? Like, it happened so many times in show business, especially in production.
Like G4?
Yeah,
Did it happen at
G4,
G4?
the Esquire Network, Pop Smear Magazine, KNAC.com. I mean, I can name a million killer jobs I had, or even jobs where like at Fender didn't go away, but I used to work for their app Fender Play. Well, that went away, so they got rid of all of us. You know what I mean? So it's like doing all these things where, regardless of my performance, I'm still beholden to the whims of outside forces and someone else that doesn't know what I do, just kind of going like, yeah, we're done with this, or yeah, cut these people, turn that team of 30 into a team of 4, do that, just pencil pushers, number crunchers. I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to bash on salespeople or lawyers or marketing people, but when you're in production, that is literally the way every job ends, is you're laid off. Always. It's just like, you get a gig and either they've given you an end date or they tell you you're all laid off. And so after decades of this, I just was like, I got to get out of this part of my life. So I kind of really went hard on freelancing as a director and creating a good rep and dynamic and reputation there, and really going hard on how can I actually make enough money as a musician to not have to do things in life I don't want to do. And that's when I kind of went, well, maybe instead of just always being the band leader, you need to like go out as a sideman, and hey, you can sing and play guitar, so go do it for whoever will pay you. Luckily, the people that want someone like me tend to be cool artists like Fear and James Williamson and Cheetah Chrome. And, so the gigs I get because of my field of expertise, so to speak, tend to be the gigs I want. But I had to kind of realize that if I really wanted to make this new chapter of my life, that I had to work harder and be more willing to be sort of flexible about what my role is. So in this band, I'm the band leader. In this band, I'm the lead singer. But in this band, I'm just the rhythm guitar player. And that's a different role. And you don't need to be all showboaty and doing all the front man stuff when you're like in the back letting someone else lead the band. So it kind of goes back to the hang thing of just like knowing your lane, knowing what your role is, knowing what people expect of you out of any given situation, and just staying in your lane and being pleasant to be around. But don't give people so much that they're always thinking about you. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that makes sense. You're not the focus in those things. Yeah. We are about to talk about your debut solo album, Living Between the Lines, but not quite yet. I have 2 more stories I need you to tell me.
Sure.
First, a little birdie told me this. Tell me about the time that David Lee Roth says to you, make it happen, Cap'n.
Well, I have a kind of a long history with Dave that I'll condense for you here. I mean, I've talked many times about the fact that Eddie Van Halen was kind of the reason why I got interested in playing guitar. I was always a music kid and a music fan, but when I heard Van Halen, it really made me go, I got to pick up this instrument, and I was kind of natural at it. So it was very encouraging to me when I first started to play guitar. I knew I was not Eddie Van Halen, but I was very inspired by him. So later on, when I had kind of a side career doing a lot more writing, and I was like a freelance journalist, I was working for this amazing magazine out of New York called Pop Smear, one of the best jobs I ever had. And they asked me what rock star I would want to interview. And I said, I want to interview David Lee Roth. And I kind of had a lead towards him. And so I ended up, long story short, is I set up the interview, interviewed him. We got along really well. I also got along really well with his manager at the time. A few months later,
Back to being a good hang.
back to being a good hang. Also, Dave, at that time, this is in the 90s, but Dave liked to drink. I like to drink. Dave liked to smoke. I like to smoke. We got along great. Dave likes to talk about himself. I love to talk about Van Halen. We got along great. We had a real fun time and a good interview, and the interview came out and we threw him on the cover, and it was kind of at the time when things were not going quite as well for him, which is to say he wasn't getting a lot of cover stories at that time. So, but we thought it's David Lee Roth, who we going to put on the cover besides Diamond Dave. So we did, and the interview was really well received, and Dave and his people really liked it. So we did a follow-up interview where he invited me to his house. And I'll simply say, and then that went well. And then I did a ton of stuff with him afterwards. And we even started writing a book together. And after trying to get a publishing deal, and all that stuff kind of came to a halt when he rejoined Van Halen, who ironically were being managed by Irving Azoff.
Wow.
The second interview I did with Dave was at his house, and myself and the publisher of Pop Smear, who I really wanted to get a job at Pop Smear, so I thought that the best way I could do it was to bring the publisher over to David Lee Roth's house, and it worked like a charm because I got a job with Pop Smear. Really cool guy, this guy James Morrell. James and I went to Dave's house, and he gave us a tour. This is the Pasadena mansion. His dad was a brain surgeon, and his dad had this fabulous mansion that Dave grew up at different times in his life. That's also where a lot of like old classic Van Halen photos and moments from videos like Panama and stuff, you'd recognize a lot of little spots in this house. Anyway, so Dave gives us the full tour of the house and the full tour of the ground. He had tennis courts. He had ears of corn. He goes, "Hey, Frank, you ever seen a fresh onion?" I was like, "No." And he reaches into the fucking ground and pulls out a fresh onion, and with his hands like Superman, like twists it in half, breaks it, and is like, "There you go, freshest onion you ever done smell." I'm like, man, that's one hell of an onion, Dave. So he takes us, he's got this back house that's kind of like his studio. He's got like a reel-to-reel player and a DAT player and, all sorts of media, guitars and recording stuff and a bar, all the stuff. It's like basically, it's sort of like a pool house turned into like a little hang and a recording studio. And so I had brought little mini recorder, and Dave's manager supplied us with a giant box of alcohol, and I brought some weed along with me. I had this idea that like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to smoke with David Lee Roth? And I'm a normal person. This is also before weed was legal. So a normal person would buy like an eighth of weed. This was not the days when you could just go into a dispensary and buy a fucking ounce, But so I had my little eighth of weed. And I said, "Hey, Dave, before we get started with the interview and I start rolling tape, I was thinking you might want to, should we smoke a joint?" And he goes, "Yeah, make it happen, Captain." So that was his like go-to to start proceeding. So I roll us in my head was kind of, one time I smoked pot with Sam Kinison, and Sam Kinison used to call them twisters. He'd go, "Hey, roll a twister." So I rolled like a twister. I took as much weed as I could. I put it in a normal size rolling paper and twisted it up. And then here you go. And he kind of looked at it like, all right. So we smoked this little twister. And then Dave goes, "Now let me bust out my stash." And he busts out like a giant, giant bag of weed and literally like giant Cheech and Chong style rolling papers and rolls the biggest joint I've ever smoked in my life to this day. Like the kind on that Bob Marley record where he's just got like, the giant joint that looks like a mini baseball bat. He rolled us one of those, and we proceeded to get so high. We also killed a bottle of Jack Daniels and a bottle of Patron. We drank way more than I normally drink. And I just remember being in David Lee Roth's bathroom to take a pee, and the whole room started spinning, and I just kind of like hyper focused on like, do not throw up in David Lee Roth's bathroom. Do not throw up in Diamond Dave's bathroom. So I kept it together, and I did not throw up until just as when we left, we went down the driveway, gave him a wave, turned the corner, the gate closes, I pulled over, and then I threw up all over the place. Then I drunk drove home. Anyways, there you go. Make it happen, Captain.
Fantastic. Last one. Tell me about the hip hop movie you made about Hell Razah. And did you really shoot for over 10 years or about 10 years?
Kinda. I mean, the way that went is that I mentioned that I worked at NBC. I was at NBC for about 10 years. And in the middle of all that, was when podcasting became a thing. And so we were kind of at the cutting edge of that. I was working for the G4 TV network, which was the video game and tech themed kind of young person's network. And so we were very into anything tech and anything sort of forward thinking in that regard. And so we started podcasting, video podcasting, audio podcasting really early on before there was really a lot of people doing it.
Like back in the Chris Hardwick days?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I mean, quite frankly, before that, but that's the era we're talking about here. This is probably like 2006, 2007, 2008, like this sort of zone. I came to G4 in 2004, and I was a couple years in when all this podcasting talk came around. And a lot of it was just them turning to us, because I was on the digital team, and saying, hey, basically I would do the digital content for their various TV shows, terrestrial, TV shows. At that time, it just meant clipping the shows and putting them on the web, like clipping out segments of the shows, or maybe doing behind the scenes interviews with Olivia Munn from Attack of the Show, or Kevin Pereira, Adam Sessler, the people that were the stars of the network, maybe doing stuff like that. Then eventually they were like, hey, we're going to let you guys do these podcasts. So if you have any ideas for unique video content that we could pair up with these shows, that would be great. So in some cases, it might be like I would team up with one of the hosts of the shows and be like, hey, you should do a review show. Like we had this show called Attack of the Show, and there was a gal named Blair Butler, and she would review comic books. So Blair and I came up with like, hey, we'll have you on camera review comic books, and then we'll get like different comic book authors to come in and, interview and promote their stuff. So that was sort of like low-hanging fruit.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hey, this is Landon from the podcast Landon Talks with Kate. Y'all, we wrote a book, Bless Your Heart, A Field Guide to All Things Southern. Comes out April 1st of 2025, and I know that's April Fool's Day, and I do stand-up comedy, but this is not a joke. I literally wrote a book. It's a field guide to life in the South. It's a field guide to how things go down here. It is a hilarious adventure. It's one of those kind of books that you can pick up at any point and read any part of it. You don't have to read it straight through, because it is just a fun jaunt, a fun little saunter down an encyclopedia of Southern life. And I will tell y'all, it really got interesting because I am Southern, obviously. So the things I say, I understand. My editors were not. So we've got footnotes, we've got cross references. This thing is turned educational because we had to explain it for everybody. So if you're from the South, you're going to love it because it's hilarious, the things that we talk about and do and the way that we exist. If you're not from the South, you're going to love it because it's a literal guide into life down here and all the silly things that we do and say and all the nostalgia as well. You can pre-order your copy now wherever books are sold. And if you want to hear more from me, check out my podcast, Landon Talks with Kate, wherever podcasts are found.
Let's get back into it.
I was coming up with ideas that were a little wackier, and like I said, hey, we need a music show. We didn't have a music TV show, but Attack of the Show was kind of like our flagship pop culture show. And I was like, we need to do some music, because they would have bands on. But it was too expensive for me to like bring on full bands and have a stage and all that stuff. I was like, what if I did something where I have rappers come in, I'll talk to them about kind of what they do on the microphone, and then have them rap. And I know most rappers came up freestyling, impromptu. Not every rapper is a great freestyle rapper, but I figured it was kind of a good talking point and a good niche, sort of like if you were talking to a guitar player and, you called the show whatever, like scales, and just use that as or chords, and use the idea of, hey, tell me about the first chords you learned as a jumping off point for a conversation about where all that went. So I'm encapsulating a lot of stuff here, but basically I came up with this show called Freestyle 101, where rappers would come in, freestyle rap, or if they didn't freestyle rap, they just rap impromptu on a beat. So even if they gave me a verse from their record, it was going to be live in the room, and they could mix it up and go as long as short as they want. And then we'd use that as a talking point. It did really well. First guest was Devin the Dude. Second guest was Killer Priest. Then we had Bus Driver. These are all kind of underground guys, but very reputable guys. And it started doing well. Then I started getting Ice-T, Mobb Deep, Fat Joe, Hieroglyphics, Insane Clown Posse, Tech Nine. I mean, just huge artists, and shot over 110 episodes. And at some point, Attack of the Show picked it up as a segment, like a recurring, bumper before and after commercials. And let's watch Cypress Hill on Freestyle 101 as we go to commercial, that kind of thing. So all of a sudden, my little web show was on TV. It won awards. Steve Jobs went on an Apple TED Talk and was talking about the future of podcasting. And as an example, he showed Freestyle 101 during the TED Talk. That was a big moment. All of a sudden, the network, of which I was kind of like doing all this under the radar, like none of the network brats knew that I was bringing in MOP and doing like freestyle rapping on the network's dime. Now they knew because Steve Jobs was a fan. So suddenly I got a budget. And then I started getting much bigger artists and going to New York and winning all these awards and stuff. That's when I went to the network and pitched the idea that we have so many great artists in this genre talking about kind of the similar subject. Why don't we spin this into a documentary? And so out of that, a couple things happened that resulted in 2 films. I did get that budget, and I started making what was going to become the movie Freestyle 101 Hip Hop History. That's my latest documentary, and it's about the history of freestyle rap, and it's all mine from that content and that era, and some additional footage I shot once I got that budget from them. But also, when I was doing the Freestyle 101 content, I had a history with this rapper named Hell Razah, who was a Wu-Tang affiliate, came up in the group Sons of Man, was now solo working with Talib Kweli and MF Doom and Pete Rock and all these, great artists and producers. And he was like a burgeoning rapper in a Wu-Tang Clan affiliate at the time, and a guy I'd known for years. I was his publicist years ago in the early 90s when we both started off in show business, and we were both young and green. We became friends. We stayed in touch. So now I'm doing this podcast. And when I went to New York to shoot, I called up Hell Razah and was like, "Hey man, I'm doing this thing, and it's on NBC and they're showing it on TV. You should be part of this." And he's like, "Oh yeah, hell yeah." So he came into the studio. It was a great day. I interviewed all these great rappers that day: Immortal Technique, Helter Skelter, Sean Price, Teflon, Shabazz the Disciple, and Hell Razah, who came in together. So we shot that episode. Then around the time that I was shooting the additional content for the documentary, I got word that Hell Razah had suffered a brain aneurysm. And I was going to go out to New York again for some more freestyle shooting. And I worked it out that me and another filmmaker who I was working with at NBC named Joe Lynch, we went out to go visit Razah. And Razah was way worse off than he was kind of letting the world to believe. He basically lost the whole left side of his body. He lost his ability. He could speak, but it was a different guy. And he lost the ability to rap, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was fucked up, and he was having insurance problems, and it was just bad. And so I just kind of, talking to Joe and then going home and talking to my boss about it, said like, "Man, we got to start shooting all this. Like, this is really interesting content." And I didn't mean that from a point of view of like, "Oh, there's a train wreck, let's put a camera on it." It was more like, my friend who's this incredible artist is quietly suffering through a life-changing thing. And we're sitting here making a documentary about the art of rapping. How do we not talk to a guy that just lost the ability to rap? You know what I mean? I was like, we should, not only should we talk to him, and that kind of became a much deeper dive into filming his rehabilitation stuff, but we should go and talk to like linguistics experts and brain experts about like what the brain is doing when it's improvising versus reading, and how that's been affected in his brain. So I kind of started originally going down that path for the film, but what happened was NBC pulled the plug on the G4 network and fired everybody. I didn't get fired, nor did my boss, but everyone around us did, and there was no more G4 network. We took it to our new bosses at the fabulous Esquire network, which was based on men's lifestyle as the Esquire magazine, now turned into a TV network with the douchiest shows ever. You're not going to believe it, but when I took them my already paid for rap documentary, which featured a lot of black guys not in fucking pocket squares with scarves, looking all dazzling in Melrose. And the only reason I bring up the color thing is that Esquire there wasn't a single colored person on the non-white person on the the Esquire network when it first came, and here I come with them with this movie with Little Fame from MOP, and these Prodigy from Mobb Deep talking about like real topics and like real edgy music. They had no interest in this whatsoever. They were just like, this is way too urban for this new thing. We are not launching our network with this content. So they basically threw me out of the office. It took Rob Juster, who was my boss at the time, went on to produce these films with me, years, but we negotiated all the footage back from them. There was about a 2-year period where we didn't think we could get the rights to any of the stuff that we'd shot. That's when I just started shooting the Hell Razah stuff on my own, because I was like, well, look, you can take away, you've got like a couple interviews I did under your umbrella before you pulled the plug with Razah, but I've known Razah my whole life, and I've got footage of him from back in the 90s, and I can go on my own dime and go out to New York and go interview him. So that's just what I did. I decided that the Razah movie, or not the movie, because I don't even know if I thought it was a movie yet, the idea of letting Razah have a platform to tell his story became personally important to me. So when it looked like the network went away, and then eventually my job went away, and the movie went away, and the podcast went away, I didn't go away from continuing to work with Hell Razah to tell his story. And it took so long. I followed him for, about 6-8 years, depending on kind of where you want to call the cutoff point, that essentially we managed to get all the footage back. And then I made 2 movies out of that. Risen, the story of Sharon Hell Razah Smith, is all of the Razah stuff, everything, including stuff I shot of him back in Sons of Man, back in the 90s, including all the NBC footage, including everything I shot. That is his story. That is him telling you, the audience, his story, and I'm there to basically assist him to be the easy hang to allow him to tell that story. And then all the rest of it became Freestyle 101, Hip Hop History. Both of them are on Amazon Prime and Tubi and YouTube Movies and Google Movies and all the places where you watch digital streaming movies. So check them out.
Kick ass. Thank you for that.
Thanks, man.
Okay, finally. Good Lord.
Yeah, I know. I can talk, man. I told you.
No, not you. I was asking too many questions about other stuff. Let's talk about your solo debut album, Living Between the Lines, out March 11th on Kitten Robot.
It's March 25th now. I got pushed back at some point, but anyways, the last single off it, Piece of Me, with me and Cherie Currie, that'll be out on the 11th as the final advanced single, and the album's out on the 25th, but whatever, close enough.
Hold on. Let's talk about Cherie Currie.
Sure.
Are you friends with her?
Yeah, she and I go way, way, way back. So I'm a huge Runaways fan, and a huge Joan Jett fan, and a huge Cherie Currie fan. She kind of gave the Cheetahs our break to some extent, in that when we started off, the Streetwalkin Cheetahs were basically a cover band playing Runaways, MC5, Stooges, and Dead Boy songs. And we went to a Cherie Currie Sandy West concert, and we went there with our albums to get autographs. And we kind of talked to her and, oh my God, Cherie, we're such big fans. We love you so much. Will you sign our records? We started a band called the Streetwalkin Cheetahs, and we play Runaway songs, and the first song we ever played was Cherry Bomb. We love you so much. She's like, all right, calm down, guys. She signed our records. Mentioned to her that our band was going to be playing at the same club, the Coconut Teaser in Hollywood, where we were talking to her right then. We invited her to come down, and we were like, and we'll be doing Cherry Bomb if you want to sing it. And she was like, sure, guys. But we didn't actually think she would show up, because like, she's Cherie Currie and she's a legend. And we were like these dorky guys that were playing in a cover band, and we'd only played like 4 gigs. And we had a couple originals that we had squeezed into our otherwise all covers by, obscure-ish cult rock bands. And so she did show up, and she got up and sang Cherry Bomb with us.
Wow.
And then that was kind of the beginning of the Cheetahs. Like, at that point, Dino and I from the band started playing in Cherie's band. Cherie started showing up pretty often and sitting in with us and telling everyone that would listen how great we were. We felt energized by this spotlight that she was giving us. So we started working in more original songs and kind of trying to become a real band and not just a cover band. And then one of the first releases we did early on was we did a cover of Cherry Bomb with Cherie singing. And we've been friends ever since. I've played guitar in her band off and on for years. She and I have done a couple different projects together. But when I was getting ready to make the solo record, There was just a few people that were important to my career that I wanted to have involved in it. I mean, basically, the whole record kind of has people involved in my career, and that every song has different musicians on it, and all those musicians can be traced to my different bands. But the features on it are Cherie and I sing a kind of Prince-style R&B ballad, kind of sort of a trippy R&B ballad called Piece of Me, and that's a duet with her and I. I don't know if you know the band The Bell Rays, but Lisa, the lead singer of The Bell Rays, she sings on the title track, Living in Between the Lines with Me, which is kind of like a Al Green Temptation style soul song. And then Eddie Spaghetti, my old pal for the Super Suckers, who I already made a collaboration record with called Motherfucking Rock and Roll. He sings on a song called Partners in Crime. And that's what you were referring to at the beginning of the interview when you asked if I had come from robbing a bank. Because on most of this record, I would say the lyrics are more personal and less sort of rock fantasy. Both Eddie and I have a long history of writing songs about mayhem and murder and bloodshed and drugs and rock and roll and fucking shit up and fuck authority and fuck the police and all that. You know, we're rebels. You know, we write outlaw music. You know what I mean? We write rebel music. So a lot of my songs are kind of like, I always think like, well, what's this movie about? You know, like my songs are like these little cinematic adventures. And of course, I put in plenty of personal stuff, and I do often write songs about my own experiences. But I decided for this solo record that I really wanted it to be a much more overt, personal album. But Partners in Crime is the one song that is just pure bloodshed and mayhem. Eddie and I rob a bank, kill a bunch of cops, get shot, try to shoot each other, get in the getaway car, headed down to Mexico. Cops are in hot pursuit. Lots of blood, lots of murder. It's fun. You know, I love that stuff. That's our Thelma and Louise, basically. If that song's a movie, it's Thelma and Louise.
I love that.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors. Let's get back into it.
What are the lines? What lines are you living between?
Living Between the Lines, the song's kind of about two things. The title and some of the lyrics in the song are talking actually about writing as a songwriter, writing as a poet, writing as a creator. What that line meant to me is, you know, when you're writing on like notebook paper, there's lines and you write on the lines. But if you're like I was, when you're a kid, you're drawing cartoons on the side and Van Halen logos in the corner and you're writing in between the lines. So I always kind of thought this concept of like living not on the line, but on the top of the bottom of the line was sort of a more interesting place to be, where like the fringe was. So part of it's that. But what the song's about in general is, in the last year, my mom passed away and my stepdad, her husband, passed away. The guy who was the attorney for Irving Azoff and all that stuff.
I'm sorry about that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. But I was going through a lot of heavy stuff leading up to that, because it wasn't like they just went. There was a lot of lead up and stuff I won't bore you with. But, and it was just a very heavy time. And it was around the same time that I was kind of putting together all these concepts about what my solo record would be. And I just felt like I'd be almost irresponsible as a songwriter not to just address this stuff head on and try to kind of write about what I was going through. So Dead Winter on the record, that's sort of about my mom's history. You know, Family Tree is about my history and my family. Living Between the Lines, we lived in this house for most of my childhood and all my teenage years, and they only sold it about like 8 years ago. So basically, I grew up in the same house, and my parents ended up selling it. And during that period when my mom was waltzing towards not being around anymore, I was thinking about what it would be like to go back to that house, you know, and thinking about it more like if it were like an empty house, like if no one had been back since. Of course, you know, in real life, someone else moved into it. But I was thinking like going back to that house and it being this sort of empty house and what that would mean and what I would sort of see, like where my memories would fill these empty rooms. That's kind of where I went with it. It was sort of like going back to your childhood house, which is full of memories, both positive and negative, and that feeling that you get. And then that feeling that I got as I was writing it reminded me of that idea of not writing on the line and writing between the lines, and therefore living between the lines. So,
my favorite song on the album is Blue Radio.
That's my favorite too, actually.
Oh, cool. Can you tell me about that song? Is it autobiographical? Do you really have a blue radio from a...
No, that one's not. That one's more of a, like a weird little poem. I mean, it's not filled with as much bloodshed as Partners in Crime. That's probably the poppiest song on the record and arguably the poppiest song I've ever written. And that was completely by design. I'm not afraid of pop and I'm not afraid of pop hooks. I don't necessarily sit around listening to a lot of like dance music and pop stuff, but I appreciate good hooks when I hear it. And when I was at Fender, at one point I was challenged with learning the song Shake It Off by Taylor Swift. And I was not, nor am I really a Taylor Swift fan. But when I learned the song and kind of got inside of it and sort of figured out sort of what made that song tick, I was like, whoa, what a smart little pop song that is. Like, it's a really, really good song. The lyrics are clever. It's musically interesting. I was kind of impressed by it. And then I started listening more to her stuff and more to just to other current pop stuff, which really, like I said, was kind of not my bag. But I was like, boy, there's a lot of really good stuff out here from a songwriting point of view. I mean, again, it's not what I would throw on in my car and crank, but as a writer, how can you not appreciate good work, So during the pandemic, I just gave myself a little songwriting challenge of like, try to write a Taylor Swift song. What is that? Like, what is the formula there? So I was kind of going for that kind of pop, kind of country, kind of bouncy, kind of dancey, Swifty vibe. But it's me, so the lyrics ended up taking a darker turn. They kind of became like those Shangri-La songs, like Leader of the Pack and Remember Walking in the Sand, where basically it's like, oh, I met this boy and he's so hunky and he's the coolest and he drove his motorcycle off a cliff and now I'm sad forever. So Blue Radio was kind of like if this young couple went to a carnival and won, like a toy, like a blue radio, where they walk around and they're in love and they're always listening to music. And then she dies, or either one of them, but in this case, she dies and he is just heartbroken and staring at this blue radio, kind of dreaming about what life could have been, like, just I had her, she's right there. And so he kind of fantasizes that maybe, she comes back to him like in a dream, like as an angel. And, it's like, well, I mean, I'm not dead. And if you don't believe I'm dead, or I'm not dead in your heart. And so he wakes up and figures he's got to figure out a way to resurrect her. So in the music video, I literally tell that story. In the song, it's, a little bit more vague and poetic, but that's the idea of what the Blue Radio means. And it's essentially a tragic love song about love and loss. Again, as I'm talking through it now, it's like when I wrote that song, I was not connecting it to any of the other heavier stuff that we were just talking about. Death, my mom, all that stuff. As the words come out of my mouth right now, I'm like, well, yeah, of course it is. It's another song I wrote as I was going through heavy shit and death. And it was a more fanciful way of dealing with it. But yeah, of course. I mean, the whole record, I guess, is about that. I think in the end, musically, it came out more like Amy Winehouse meets Cheap Trick.
I can see that.
My formula for writing songs and making albums is something meets Cheap Trick. Cheap Trick's pretty much my favorite. I would say they're in my favorite bands and certainly a band I look to for expertise in songwriting. Tom Petty is another one. And so I think in the end, because it's me and because I'm not really that much of a pop guy, it became a power pop song. It's got these very, very slick power pop hooks. And then it's got some sardonic love story lyrics, but then it's got the big Cheap Trick power chords, So it's just me trying to break out of my comfort zone as a songwriter, but I was very happy with the results. And I decided that with this solo record, that I didn't have to play by the same rules as a Streetwalkin Cheetahs record or a Fear record. I'm allowed to be more vulnerable. I'm allowed to embrace different influences. I'm allowed to be as masculine or as feminine or as somewhere in between as I want to be. I decided that I didn't have to be a badass on every song. There's something about when you're in a testosterone fueled punk band like the Cheetahs or Fear, Manitoba, pretty much all the bands I play in, that there's a certain kind of outlaw badassery to it all. But I decided that this context, I didn't need to embrace those things and that I could just be a little bit more raw and honest, maybe.
Well, it's a wonderful album.
Thank you.
It takes you all over the place, mood-wise, and I guess just lyrically. yes, it's all you, but I feel like every song is almost a different version of you. That makes any sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
And did you say that the album comes out March 25th?
Yeah, March 25th. So the first single, Baby Dynamite, came out like 2 weeks ago. And the video for that one is kind of like part one to the love story. And then part two is Blue Radio. I mean, in the music videos, there's like a 1-2 part kind of saga being told. But the first single was Baby Dynamite. Then 2 weeks later, yesterday, Blue Radio came out. And then I believe March 11th is when the Cherie Currie single Piece of Me comes out. And then on the 25th, the album will be out. So we're kind of building towards it, and each single is kind of introducing the audience to a new color, if you will, on the album. And each music video, and I direct the music videos myself, are sort of my visuals to it and kind of trying to put just some additional personality onto the whole thing.
Gotcha. I have a favor to ask you.
Sure.
Can I play my favorite song and your favorite song, Blue Radio? Can I play that song on this podcast?
Oh, yeah. Blue Radio officially came out yesterday, so you absolutely can play it. We're encouraging that. As far as I'm concerned, you can play anything off the record you want. There's no rules in digital music anymore.
There's no rules anywhere anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's music. I mean, I made the record so people could hear it. You know?
Will you do me a favor?
Sure.
Will you introduce that song like you're a radio DJ?
Sure. Let's see. Am I supposed to be myself, or am I introducing it in first person or third person?
Your choice. Dealer's choice.
Huh.
Hell, do it like you're a Diamond Dave.
All right. Well, I mean, if I was me, I would be like, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Frank Meyer, and this is the new single off my debut solo record. It's called Blue Radio, and I hope you love it. If I was Diamond Dave, I would be something like, ladies and gentlemen, from my fabulous Algonquin round table of celebrity guests and pirates and gypsies, tramps, and thieves comes my old pal and barbecue master buddy, Francisco Meyer. I love him. You hate him. Everyone's going to do drugs. Let's go.
That is fantastic.
Something like that. I'm paraphrasing, you know.
Sure.
All I want in the world is my blue radio. My girlfriend gave it to me when we were going steady-o. Late one night by the carnival ride, she took my hand by the neon light. It was the last thing she gave to me before she died. Blue radio. When she said I love you, it sounded before she died. Blue radio. Like living in stereo. Blue radio. Blue radio. Blue radio in my ear. The last sound I wanna hear. Blue radio on my mind. Goodbye.
Frank, tell everybody where they can find you and your album on social media or websites or whatever.
I've made it easy. You can find me at Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and the .com at just The Frank Meyer. So TheFrankMeyer, like Oscar Mayer. The Frank Meyer. If you go to those in any of those social medias or just go to thefrankmeyer.com, they'll all take you to my various landing spots. So yeah, and as far as the record goes, I have a Bandcamp where eventually it will live. But Kitten Robot Records is the label, and they released it. They also put out my album with Eddie Spaghetti, Motherfucking Rock and Roll, and you can just go to kittenrobotrecords.com, and they've got all your Frank Meyer needs.
Oh, fantastic. Do you plan to tour this record?
Yeah, I've got, man, my whole year is all touring at this point. Starting next week, I go out for basically the next 8 months, almost solid, but it's divided up between the many groups I'm simultaneously playing in. So for the solo record, Spain has always been a great market for me, and I always do real well there. So I figured if I was going to launch a solo tour anywhere, that would be the best place. So in May, I'm going to Spain to tour in May and June for the solo record. Then when I come back, I'm doing a Southern California tour for the solo record. Then in the fall, I'm doing like a more national tour, hoping to get out to the East Coast and stuff. But I'm also touring with Fear throughout the rest of the year, doing everything from one-offs and weekends to gigantic, huge, enormo dome punk festivals, because Fear's kind of a legacy band now to where we get lots of big gigs, which is awesome. And then I'm also going out with the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. We've got some local dates. We're doing a UK tour in July, and then I'm out with Handsome Dick Manitoba from the Dictators doing a Midwest tour, a Spain tour, a Sweden tour, a West Coast tour, a whole bunch of stuff. So my tour schedule is fairly ridiculous at this point, and it covers, almost 6 acts simultaneously. It's a lot of practicing I have to do. I never used to practice guitar. Once I got pretty good at it, I kind of just started writing songs and not really and touring and not really practicing. But now I practice constantly. When we're done with this interview, I've got to run through the whole new Fear set because we've got rehearsal in a few days, and I just got to keep on hammering it in my brain. I tend to be good with repetition, so I just, whatever is next on the touring schedule, I'm just running through that set every single day.
Love it. And all of those different acts that you're touring with and including your solo stuff, are all of those dates on your website, or any of those dates on your website?
Basically, whatever is kind of coming up is on my website. So right now, the 2 ones around the corner are next week. We've got a couple Fear dates. We're going out with Negative Approach, and we're doing Lansing, Michigan, and somewhere else I'm spacing out on at the time. And then I go out with Handsome Dick Manitoba for the Midwest run, and that stuff's all announced. We've not announced the Cheetahs UK dates yet, and I have not announced the Spain solo dates yet. So the stuff that's like, this month and next month, that's all been announced. The stuff that's in April, May, June, July, August, September, not been announced yet.
So everybody, make sure you follow Frank on all the social medias and keep checking back on his website. I'm sure that those dates will be posted as they become available.
I'm always ahead of that stuff, but one thing I've learned in social media land is like, you don't want to put out too much stuff too early because people forget about it by the time you're actually doing it.
Sure.
So
yeah,
you got to parcel out the information.
Yeah, you got to put it out when it's relevant.
Right.
Frank Meyer. Oh my gosh, dude. Is there anything we didn't talk about or I didn't ask you about specifically that you wanted to talk about today? Like, did we cover the big bits?
I think we covered the big bits. I mean, specifically, no. Non-specifically, shit. I could talk all day, man. But let's not open up that can of worms. We'll be here for hours.
Yeah, maybe we can have you back and you can open it up then.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dude, Frank Meyer, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day and your hectic, literally touring with everybody you've ever met schedule to hang out and let us get to know you a little bit better on Fascination Street, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Let's just say this interview was fascinating.
Oh, love it.
See?
Love it.
That's why they pay me the big bucks, buddy.
Oh, I'm so glad they pay them to someone.
I don't know what big bucks are.
Just so you know, my listeners and also my guests are called streetwalkers.
Ah, holy mackerel. Well, then these are my people.
These are your people, and now you're
Excellent.
officially a streetwalker.
Excellent. Well, unofficially, I've been one for years, apparently, but now it's official. So
long time ago. Now it's official.
good with me, man.
All right, cool. Thanks, Frank, man. You have a great rest of your
got
day,
it.
and have fun touring for 8 months. Good God.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Take it easy.
Bye, buddy. Opening music is the song FSP Theme, written, performed, and provided by Ambush Vin. Closing music is from the song Say My Name off the 2021 album Underdog Anthems, used with permission from Jax Hollow. If you like the show, tell a friend, subscribe, and rate and review the show on iTunes and wherever else you download podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. All the episodes are available there as well. Check me out on Vero at Fascination Street Pod and TikTok at Fascination Street Pod. And again, thanks for listening.